Imagine dedicating 8 years to one company, working nights, solving every crisis, and believing your next promotion is finally within reach. Then a new manager arrives and within months, everything changes. He takes credit for your work, quietly sabotages every promotion you apply for, and even ruins job offers outside the company, all while convincing executives that you're the problem. I spent over a year wondering if I simply wasn't good enough. But one unexpected audit uncovered a secret my boss never thought anyone would find. And the moment the truth came out, his entire career collapsed. This is the story of how the man who tried to destroy my future ended up destroying his own. My name is Ethan Carter, and when this story began, I was 32 years old. I worked as a senior operations coordinator for a nationwide logistics company based in Chicago. We weren't some flashy tech startup or Fortune 500 giant. We specialized in warehouse distribution, freight scheduling, and inventory management for hundreds of retail stores across the Midwest. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, offered decent benefits, and I genuinely enjoyed solving operational problems. I'd spent almost 8 years building my career there. I started as an entry-level warehouse planner, slowly earned promotions, completed company-sponsored management courses, and eventually became the right hand of our regional operations manager. People trusted me because I wasn't interested in office politics. If someone needed help, I helped. If a warehouse was behind schedule, I'd stay late without complaining. I believed hard work eventually paid off. For years it actually did. Then our regional manager retired. Everyone assumed I'd be promoted. Even people from headquarters hinted that my name was being discussed. I wasn't celebrating early, but I allowed myself to believe I finally had a real chance. Instead, headquarters hired someone from outside the company. His name was Brandon Hayes. He was 39, carried himself like a motivational speaker, and introduced himself during our first staff meeting with a presentation full of phrases like high-performance culture, elite mindset, and only winners survive. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. He spoke for nearly 45 minutes without saying anything useful about how our department actually worked. At the end of the meeting, he smiled confidently. "I don't believe in excuses," he announced. "If something isn't getting done, it's because someone isn't trying hard enough." Several people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Our job wasn't simple. Drivers got sick. Weather delayed shipments. Customers changed orders at the last minute. Machines broke. Anyone who had spent even 1 week in logistics understood that unexpected problems happened every day. Brandon clearly didn't. The first month wasn't terrible. He spent most of his time asking questions and pretending to take notes. Unfortunately, he wasn't learning. He was memorizing names so he'd know who to blame later. Because I knew the operation better than anyone else in the office, Brandon leaned on me constantly. First, I didn't mind. New managers always needed help. I'd prepare reports, explain warehouse metrics, walk him through scheduling software, review customer contracts, correct inventory forecasts. After a while, I noticed something strange. Whenever executives from headquarters joined our weekly video meetings, Brandon presented my work as if he'd created everything himself. The spreadsheets? Mine. Performance improvements? Mine. Cost-saving recommendations? Mine. He never once mentioned my name. At first I convinced myself it wasn't intentional. Maybe he'd simply forgotten. Then one afternoon I overheard him speaking with another regional manager. "I completely redesigned our reporting system," Brandon said proudly. I nearly laughed. He couldn't even log into half the software without asking me for help. That was the first crack in the image I'd built of him. The second came 2 weeks later. One of our biggest retail clients suddenly requested emergency deliveries after another supplier missed several shipments. It was a nightmare. Everyone worked overtime. Warehouse supervisors skipped lunch. Drivers volunteered for extra routes. I stayed in the office until almost midnight for 3 consecutive days, coordinating inventory between 4 distribution centers. We pulled it off. The client renewed their annual contract because we delivered everything on time. The following Monday, headquarters organized a conference call to congratulate our region. Brandon accepted every compliment. "I pushed the team pretty hard," he said with a satisfied smile. "They weren't happy at first, but strong leadership always produces results." Not once did he acknowledge the dozens of employees who actually kept the operation alive. After the meeting, one of our warehouse supervisors walked into my office. "You know," he sighed, "if he spent half as much time working as he does talking, we'd probably finish by 5 every day." I couldn't disagree. Over the next several months, Brandon developed a routine. He'd arrive around 9:30 despite everyone else starting at 8. He'd spend an hour drinking expensive coffee while scrolling through business podcasts. Around lunchtime, he'd disappear for executive meetings. Sometimes those meetings lasted 3 hours. No one knew where he actually went. Meanwhile, every urgent decision somehow landed on my desk. If a shipment was delayed, I fixed it. If a warehouse computer crashed, I coordinated IT. If customers threatened penalties, I negotiated solutions. Brandon only appeared once everything was under control. Then he'd ask for a summary so he could brief leadership. Gradually, my normal 40-hour workweek became 50, then 60. My girlfriend, Emily, started noticing before I did. "You've answered work emails during dinner every night this week," she said one evening. "It's temporary," I replied automatically. "It'll calm down." She looked at me for several seconds. "You've been saying that for 6 months. She wasn't wrong. The stress was starting to follow me home. I wasn't sleeping well anymore. Even weekends felt shorter because I spent half of Sunday preparing reports Brandon would eventually present as his own. Still, I stayed. Mostly because I believed patience would eventually be rewarded. After all, headquarters could see who actually kept the region running. Or at least, that's what I thought. One Friday afternoon, I received an email from Human Resources. An internal operations manager position had opened at another regional office. It was exactly the promotion I'd been working toward. Better salary, company vehicle, larger bonus structure, leadership responsibilities. Everything I'd been waiting for. Emily practically forced me to apply. "You've earned this," she said. "So stop waiting for someone to notice." I updated my resume that weekend and submitted my application Monday morning. For the first time in months, I genuinely felt optimistic. I had no idea that Brandon already knew about my application, and he had absolutely no intention of letting me leave. I didn't tell anyone at work that I'd applied for the operations manager position. The application process was confidential, or at least it was supposed to be. Only Human Resources and the hiring panel should have known. A week later, I received an email inviting me to a virtual interview with the regional vice president and 2 directors from headquarters. The interview went surprisingly well. They asked detailed questions about inventory optimization, labor planning, transportation costs, and crisis management. Unlike Brandon, they actually understood the business. One director smiled after I explained how I'd reduced shipping delays by reorganizing warehouse priorities during peak season. "We've heard good things about your work," she said. Walking back to my desk afterward, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt like my career was finally moving forward. That feeling lasted exactly 4 days. Late Friday afternoon, my phone rang. It was someone from Human Resources. "Hi, Ethan," she began carefully. "I wanted to personally let you know that another candidate has been selected." I was disappointed but not devastated. Competition was expected. Then she hesitated. There was some concerning feedback during the reference process. My stomach tightened. What kind of feedback? I'm really not supposed to discuss internal references. I understand, I replied. But was it about my work? Another pause. Let's just say someone questioned whether you're ready for a management position. The call ended politely. I sat there staring at my monitor. There was only one person inside the company who would benefit from keeping me exactly where I was. Brandon. I wanted to believe I was overthinking it. Maybe another manager had simply been more qualified. Maybe I really wasn't ready. But over the next month, little things started happening that were impossible to ignore. Whenever headquarters requested performance reports, Brandon insisted on sending them himself. Whenever executives visited our office, he asked me to stay available instead of joining the meetings. Whenever customers complimented our department, Brandon conveniently forgot to mention who had actually solved their problems. One afternoon, I accidentally walked into the conference room while Brandon was speaking with 2 directors from headquarters. He didn't notice me immediately. Ethan is technically very capable, he was saying. But leadership isn't just about technical skills. One of the directors asked, "How does he handle pressure?" Brandon sighed dramatically. "He works hard, but sometimes he gets overwhelmed. I worry he'd struggle managing an entire region." I quietly stepped back before anyone saw me. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I wasn't just losing promotions. Someone was actively shaping how senior leadership viewed me. Around that time, another opportunity appeared. A competitor was expanding operations in Illinois and recruiting experienced logistics managers. Their recruiter contacted me through LinkedIn. The salary was almost 20% higher than mine. After 2 interviews, they seemed genuinely interested. Everything was moving quickly until the recruiter suddenly stopped responding. 3 days later, she finally called. "I'm really sorry," she said. "Our executive team decided to move in another direction." I thanked her for letting me know. Then she added something unexpected. "I probably shouldn't say this." She lowered her voice. "Your current manager gave us an extremely negative reference." I nearly dropped the phone. I never listed him as a reference. "I know." "Then why would they contact him?" "They didn't." Now I was completely confused. She continued. "He reached out after hearing through mutual industry contacts that you were interviewing." My heartbeat accelerated. "What exactly did he say?" Another long pause. "He claimed you missed deadlines, had trouble working with teams, and weren't considered management material." None of it was true. In fact, most of those deadlines had been met because I'd fixed problems Brandon created. The recruiter sounded genuinely uncomfortable. "Honestly, Ethan, your interview was excellent. That's why this surprised us." After we hung up, I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes. I finally understood. Brandon wasn't afraid of losing a good employee. He was afraid of losing the person who quietly kept his department functioning. As long as I stayed, he could continue taking credit for my work. If I left, everyone would discover how little he actually contributed. From that day forward, I started paying closer attention. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed proof. Once I started looking, I noticed patterns that I'd ignored for months. Brandon constantly blocked vacation requests for experienced employees, while approving time off for his favorites. He criticized people publicly but praised them privately whenever executives were watching. He demanded detailed progress reports every evening, yet almost never read them. And he disappeared far more often than anyone realized. His calendar always showed client meetings. His office was usually empty. One Wednesday, I needed his approval for an urgent contract amendment worth nearly $500,000. The receptionist looked puzzled. "He left after lunch." "Did he say where?" She shrugged. "Another executive meeting." The client couldn't wait. I handled the situation myself. The next morning, Brandon congratulated himself for making the right leadership decisions during our staff meeting. No one challenged him. People simply looked down at the table. I understood why. Everyone was exhausted. Everyone needed the paycheck. Nobody wanted to become his next target. Then something happened that changed everything. Our finance manager, Lisa, invited me to grab coffee before work. She'd worked for the company almost 15 years and rarely involved herself in office gossip. As soon as we sat down, she looked around to make sure nobody was listening. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she said, "but I think you deserve to know." I stayed quiet. She stirred her coffee for several seconds. "I was reviewing budget approvals yesterday." "So?" She looked directly at me. "Brandon specifically requested that headquarters remove you from the leadership development program." I frowned. "What?" "He said investing in your management training wasn't worth the budget because you weren't considered promotion material." For a moment I couldn't speak. That leadership program had been one of the biggest reasons I'd stayed with the company. Graduates almost always became regional managers within 2 years. Brandon hadn't just blocked one promotion. He was making sure there wouldn't be another opportunity. Lisa sighed. "I've worked with a lot of managers over the years. I've never seen one work this hard to hold someone back." I drove home that evening feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger. Clarity. For months I'd blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I needed more experience. Maybe I simply had to work harder. Now I knew the truth. No amount of overtime would ever be enough. As long as Brandon Hayes remained my manager, my career would never move forward. I stopped asking myself how to impress him. Instead, I started asking a very different question. How do you expose someone who has spent years carefully protecting their reputation? The funny thing about dishonest people is that they usually believe they're smarter than everyone else. Brandon certainly did. He wasn't careless enough to send stupid emails or openly insult executives. He knew exactly how to behave whenever someone important was around. But he had one weakness. He thought nobody inside the office was paying attention. After my conversation with Lisa, I stopped trying to prove myself. Instead, I became an observer. Every time Brandon claimed to be visiting a client, I quietly checked our customer relationship system. Every meeting with a client had to be logged afterward with notes, follow-up tasks, and expense reports. Week after week. Nothing. No meeting notes. No mileage reports. No customer updates. It was as if half of his business trips had never happened. At first I assumed he was simply forgetting the paperwork. Then I started noticing another pattern. Every Thursday afternoon, almost like clockwork, Brandon disappeared around 2 o'clock. He'd tell the receptionist something vague. Off-site meeting. Executive networking. Supplier visit. The explanations constantly changed. One Thursday I happened to call a longtime customer whose account Brandon supposedly visited every week. During our conversation I casually asked, "Did Brandon stop by today?" There was silence for a second. "Ethan, I haven't seen Brandon in months." That caught my attention. When I hung up, I opened our scheduling system. According to Brandon's calendar, he'd spent nearly 4 hours with that customer. He hadn't been there at all. Over the next several weeks, I quietly verified more of his meetings. Different customers. Different dates. Same result. Some hadn't seen him in weeks. Others hadn't met him all year. One warehouse manager laughed when I asked. If Brandon actually showed up as often as his calendar says, I'd probably recognize his face. I never accused Brandon of anything. I simply wrote everything down. Dates, times, customers, conversations. Nothing more. At the same time, something else happened that seemed insignificant at first. Emily and I attended a charity fundraiser organized by the local Chamber of Commerce. It wasn't really our kind of event, but one of Emily's friends had invited us. Most of the evening was exactly what you'd expect. Small talk, business cards, expensive wine, people pretending to enjoy networking. Near the end of the night, I bumped into a woman I recognized immediately. Her name was Rachel. She had worked in our marketing department years earlier before transferring to another company. We chatted for a few minutes about old coworkers. Then she asked a question that completely caught me off guard. "So, is Brandon still dating that consultant?" I blinked. "What consultant?" Rachel looked confused. "Wait. I thought everyone knew." "I honestly have no idea what you're talking about." She immediately looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry. Forget I said anything." "No," I said carefully. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before answering. "I've seen Brandon having dinner several times with a woman named Chloe. She's an outside marketing consultant. They definitely didn't look like coworkers." I shrugged. "Maybe they're just friends." Rachel gave me a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. "I've been married 18 years, she replied. "I know the difference." I didn't ask any more questions. Rumors weren't evidence. For all I knew, Rachel had misunderstood the situation. Still, I remembered something. Brandon's wife had attended last year's company holiday party. Her name was Melissa. They had 2 young children. He'd spent half the evening talking about how important family was. I pushed the thought aside. His personal life wasn't my business. My problem was professional. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. 2 weeks later, headquarters announced a surprise operational audit. Normally those audits happen every 2 years. This one was almost 6 months early. Brandon panicked. For the first time since he'd arrived, he actually looked nervous. He called me into his office Monday morning. "Ethan, I need every performance report from the last 18 months. every customer review, every staffing analysis, everything. I nodded. When do you need it? Tomorrow morning. I stared at him. That's hundreds of documents. I know. You'll figure it out. Then he smiled. You're good at cleaning up problems. Cleaning up. Not solving. Not preparing. Cleaning up. Because that's exactly what I'd been doing ever since he'd become my manager. For the next 12 hours I barely left my desk. Around 8 that evening, everyone else had gone home. I was still organizing files when Brandon walked past my office carrying his laptop bag. Heading home? I asked. He checked his watch. Important dinner meeting. Good luck tomorrow. Then he disappeared. I stayed another 3 hours finishing everything he'd requested. The audit began the following morning. 3 executives from headquarters arrived shortly after 9. Brandon greeted them like old friends. He gave a polished presentation about leadership, efficiency, and operational excellence. Then the questions started. An auditor asked about several client visits listed on Brandon's calendar. Can we see the follow-up reports? Brandon confidently opened the system. Nothing. He clicked again. Still nothing. I'll have Ethan pull those, he said without looking at me. I quietly replied, there aren't any. The room became noticeably quieter. Brandon laughed awkwardly. They must have been archived. One of the auditors frowned. Our system doesn't archive client reports. Brandon quickly changed the subject. The meeting continued, but I noticed something important. The auditors had stopped taking Brandon's explanations at face value. They started verifying everything. Every report. Every expense. Every approval. Every signature. Brandon remained calm on the outside. Inside, I could almost see the panic growing. Later that afternoon, one of the auditors asked if they could speak with me privately. We stepped into a small conference room. The senior auditor closed the door. Ethan, she began, you've been here a long time. 8 years. She nodded. I have a simple question. Who actually runs this department day to day? I didn't answer immediately. I chose every word carefully. My responsibility is making sure operations continue smoothly. She smiled slightly. That's not what I asked. Another long silence. Finally I replied, I do whatever the business needs. She thanked me. Nothing else. No leading questions. No accusations. Just one simple conversation. As I walked back to my desk, I realized something. I no longer needed to prove Brandon was incompetent. Headquarters was beginning to notice it on their own. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Brandon looked like a man who realized the ground beneath him was starting to disappear. I expected the audit to end with a few recommendations and maybe an awkward conversation for Brandon. I was wrong. 2 days after the auditors left, life in the office returned to normal, or at least it appeared to. Brandon suddenly became unusually friendly. He started thanking people after meetings. He stopped criticizing employees in front of customers. He even bought lunch for the entire office one Friday. Nobody bought the act. People accepted the free food, smiled politely, and went back to work. Felt less like appreciation and more like damage control. Then something happened that confirmed my suspicions. Late one afternoon I received a call from the vice president of operations, the same executive who had interviewed me months earlier for the promotion I never received. Ethan, do you have a few minutes? Of course. I'd like you to come to headquarters tomorrow morning. Is everything okay? It will be easier to discuss in person. That was all he said. I barely slept that night. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Maybe they were investigating Brandon. Maybe they were restructuring. Maybe I was about to lose my job. When I arrived at headquarters the next morning, the vice president greeted me personally and led me into a conference room. 3 other executives were already waiting, including the senior auditor. The vice president didn't waste time. We owe you an apology. That wasn't what I expected to hear. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of performance reviews, internal recommendations, and promotion evaluations. Most of them had my name on them. Every single negative management assessment had one thing in common. Brandon Hayes. The vice president leaned back. Until recently, We assumed these evaluations reflected your actual performance. The auditor spoke next. During our audit, we interviewed more than 20 employees, warehouse supervisors, department managers, customers, regional staff. Your name came up constantly. She smiled, not once in a negative way. Then she placed another document on the table. It was an organizational responsibility chart. Someone had highlighted dozens of daily tasks, budget approvals, vendor negotiations, staff scheduling, inventory planning, emergency logistics, contract reviews. Almost every highlighted responsibility had quietly been handled by me. The vice president sighed. To be completely honest, we had no idea how much of the regional operation depended on you. I didn't know what to say. For over a year I'd questioned my own abilities. Now I was learning that the people who actually investigated the facts had reached the exact opposite conclusion. Then the vice president asked the question I'd been waiting for. Did Brandon ever discourage you from applying for promotions? I answered honestly. He didn't discourage me. He made sure I never got them. For the next hour I explained everything. The blocked leadership program, the negative references, the canceled interviews, the projects he presented as his own, the fake client meetings. I exaggerated nothing. If I couldn't prove something, I didn't mention it. When the meeting ended, the vice president thanked me. We'll handle the rest. That afternoon I returned to my office. Brandon wasn't there. Neither was his assistant. Nobody seemed to know where he'd gone. Around 3 o'clock, 2 members of Human Resources arrived along with corporate legal counsel. They went directly into Brandon's office. About 20 minutes later, Brandon walked out carrying a cardboard box. He looked completely different. No confident smile. No expensive speech. No fake enthusiasm. Just silence. As he passed my desk, he stopped. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and said quietly, "You knew." I simply replied, "I knew what I was responsible for." He stared at me for another moment before security escorted him to the elevator. That was the last time I ever saw Brandon Hayes. Over the following weeks, the truth slowly spread throughout the company. The audit had uncovered far more than anyone expected. Brandon had submitted inaccurate travel reports for nearly 2 years. Many of the client visits he claimed never happened. Several expense reimbursements couldn't be verified. Multiple employees confirmed that he routinely took credit for their work, while deliberately giving negative evaluations to anyone he viewed as a threat. The false references he gave about me became particularly important. Corporate legal determined that he had knowingly interfered with internal hiring decisions by providing misleading performance assessments that directly contradicted documented results. That alone violated several company policies. Combined with everything else, there was no realistic way for him to remain employed. Officially, Brandon resigned. Unofficially, everyone understood he had been given a choice between resignation and termination. About a month later, I received another call from headquarters. This time I recognized the vice president's number immediately. "We have another operations manager opening." He laughed softly. "If you're still interested, we'd like you to skip the interview process." I accepted before he finished the sentence. 3 months later, I was managing an entirely different region. For the first time in years, I worked 40-hour weeks again. My phone stopped ringing during dinner. Weekends actually felt like weekends. Emily noticed the difference before anyone else. "You smile a lot more now," she said one evening. I forgot what that felt like. Looking back, people sometimes ask whether I regret not taking revenge sooner. The truth is, I never needed revenge. I simply refused to keep protecting someone who had built his career by standing on everyone else's shoulders. Brandon destroyed his own reputation. All I did was stop carrying the weight that had been hiding his failures. The moment people saw who was actually doing the work, everything else happened naturally. Sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't exposing someone's lies. It's allowing everyone to finally see the truth without you covering for them anymore.